Hi everyone, Anthony Scaramucci here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Vic Mensa album, The Autobiography. Vic Mensa is a Chicago rapper, singer, songwriter, formerly of the band Kids These Days, and this is his long-awaited commercial, full-length, debut album. It's been about 4 years since Vic broke through as a solo artist with his internet tape, and it's been a little touch and go from there. Like, he hasn't put out a lot of material since the release of that kind of attention-grabbing, well-received project outside of a couple EPs and some spotty singles here and there, some of which were kind of mediocre, like that one with Skrillex. Collectively, all of this material doesn't really add up to much of a artistic direction. Going into this album, I really did not know what to expect because his EPs, his singles prior, were just all over the place. I just had no idea where Vic was going to go with this thing. But now we finally have the album, a substantive artistic statement, a vision of who Vic is as an artist, especially with a title as bold as The Autobiography. However, now that the project is finally here, I'm not hearing a whole lot that is really putting Vic in his own lane, because on this thing he's just kind of sounding like an amalgamation of his contemporaries. The Autobiography kind of shoots for the conceptuality of a Kendrick Lamar project, as well as the anthemic musicality of a Kanye album, and a lot of Vic's rap styles on this thing feel subtly bitten off of J. Cole. Now, all of these sounds come together pretty seamlessly. It keeps Vic from feeling like, just simply a copy of one single artist. But a good deal of the time, I don't really feel like these characteristics add up to all that much. At least not a large, coherent, exciting statement. A lot of the production feels pretty contemporary, pretty trap influenced a lot of the time, but there are beats on here that do transport me to a few different points in Kanye's career. There's some cuts here that feature the balladry of 808s and Heartbreak, a couple of the intro tracks like Say I Didn't, or Memories on 47th Street, or Homewrecker featuring Weezer. These instrumentals kind of throw me back to the early years in Kanye's discography, where he was chopping up a lot more soul music. I'm actually kind of impressed that these instrumentals bring back a lot of the fundamentals of the beats of Bling era rap without sounding too dated. Meanwhile, the track Down for Some Ignorance sounds like a slightly paler version of the Chief Keef or Travis Scott-inspired trap that lived on Yeezus. I can kind of smell the stench of wolves still hanging on Vic too. I also like the eerie nocturnal trap beat on the song Heaven on Earth. It has these kind of beautiful cycled little melodic samples playing throughout, and the smooth somber synths on the song Wings, featuring production from Pharrell, is actually a nice change of pace too. Features this beat switch up over which Vic brings like this really speedy flow, this lyrical intensity, talking about addiction, suicide. It's a real dark point on the record. For the most part, the production on this thing is really tasteful and helps the album out a lot. It's one of the true highlights of the record, and it's not hard to see why, given that No ID has his hands in pretty much most of the production on this thing. I think that's pretty much the only reason Vic is able to get away with so many grand 4 to 5 minute musical diatribes on this record and have it not just sound like really deflated and overwrought and boring. Now, as far as the concept on this thing goes, I mean, it's there, but it's also kind of not there. Considering the title of this thing, we would expect Vic to get autobiographical on this thing, maybe some kind of look backwards into his life, which is fine, but even if this record wasn't named The Autobiography, I mean, we would kind of expect Vic going into this album to rap about himself anyway. Occasionally on this thing, we get these spoken word passages that sounds like Vic is writing a letter to kind of guide the audience from one song topic to the next, but it's not like he revisits this idea or includes these interludes so often that they create some kind of story or theme across the record. It's like we only get them once in a while when Vic really has a story he wants to tell on the track. Kendrick's poem on To Pimp a Butterfly comes to mind, but what Vic is doing here is just way less effective. Now, the weakest link in the chain on this album has to unquestionably be Vic Mensa's vocals. Now, that's not to say he's a bad rapper. He's actually a very capable rapper who showcases a lot of talent across this record, but his singing voice, which he does use quite often on this thing, does leave a lot to be desired. And because I feel like he gets so much of his rap style on this record from J. Cole, I can't help but feel like he suffers from a lot of the same problems that Cole does on his projects. Like, for one, almost every track here has at least 1 or 2 bars that are really bad or kind of cringy or corny, like on the opener where he's talking about tuning his own horn like Coltrane, or on Memories on 47th where he's talking about taking over the world like Pinky and the Brain. And I could kind of see this line working if you gave it like a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek or self-aware or kind of ironic tone to it, but he's totally serious here. Fist in the air like Rocky, bitch, I think my name's Sylvester. Or on the song Heaven on Earth where he's rapping on the first verse, essentially a letter to a dead friend of his, which is totally fine. Actually a song concept I like. I'm loving this song until we get to the second verse where he is rapping from the standpoint of his friend from heaven back to him, and then he's rapping about his buddy smoking with Kurt Cobain, which that's not really the kicker here. Kurt Cobain eventually relays the message back to Vic that, hey man, Kurt Cobain here, really like your music. You're doing a great job. Keep it up. Which is a little self-congratulatory, to say the least. I think it's also worth mentioning at this point that Vic has a little bit of a savior complex on this album, or at least a little bit of a hero complex, which I think gives him a bit of a false sense of security. Like, his lyrics and what he's saying doesn't exactly need to be up to snuff. It can be a little corny here and there because ultimately what he's trying to say, the overall message is really meaningful. It's really important. But in my opinion, I mean, what he is spitting on this record is not any more poignant than what a lot of his contemporaries are saying. It's not like he's hit upon some kind of nerve or root here, or some kind of, deep understanding of his topics that no other artist who is his better has approached. Obviously, Vic's lyrics are not the worst that you're going to hear. And most of the time, I think he overcomes these samples of Korn with the bulk of his verses, the rest of his verses being pretty quality and delving very nicely into some pretty deep and pretty gritty themes of addiction and violence, his youth, betrayal, success. There are a lot of kind of riveting chapters of Vic's life story, and they play out pretty well on this album. However, the love songs are really where this thing suffers, which starts with the song Homewrecker. And I pretty much love the instrumental on this track, but the topic is so douchey. It's essentially about Vic pissing off his significant other because she's caught him cheating, and he shows very little remorse for his behavior, and the song centers mostly around just his girlfriend going crazy and breaking things, wrecking the home wrecking, because of his behavior. We both made mistakes, baby. And instead of just kind of being a moment where he self-reflects or something like that, again, the whole thing just centers around what she's doing in her behavior, not what he did to sort of set off the situation or kind of get the ball rolling. And the song Gorgeous is even worse because Vic is essentially giving us another song about cheating where he's playing two girls at once and essentially why he can't stop. Which I could sort of see a song concept like this working if it were to be kind of funny or flirty or but instead Vic kind of uses this opportunity to rap about essentially why he can't help himself and drops amazing bars here like, you want to own me like copyright, but shooting stars so hard to hold down. Ugh. She had a pumpkin ass. How could I not smash? That's so bad. But the absolute worst has to be the song Coffee and Cigarettes, where Vic is essentially trying to pull off this heartfelt ballad about a young love who he had strong feelings for. It feels almost as if he wishes that he could have stayed with her or gotten with her or kind of forged this long-lasting relationship with her that he would keep until this day, and respect, I'm sure, given the previous material on here. And this is really where Vic's singing falters. Like, his singing, especially when he's like reaching into his upper register and straining his voice, sounds terrible. The lyrics are filled with all this like melodramatic and cliched, symbolism and similes and metaphors, like cigarettes ashing and writing our names on bridges and public property. I wish you loved me as much as you love weed. I know you like to smoke. Like, my mother-in-law was laughing her ass off at this song and just could not stop talking about how terrible it was. The song We Could Be Free, that's effectively the closing track of the album, is kind of a general statement on race relations, asking the listener to put themselves in the shoes of their enemy to kind of facilitate some sort of understanding, less prejudice, less hatred. The verses between these hooks, Vic essentially weaves in elements of his life story. Again, some weak singing vocals on this thing, but Ty Dolla $ign's spectacular features on this track actually tie up some of the vocal moments nicely. But somehow I don't really feel like this track works that much as a closer, like it's not much of a final statement about everything Vic has said up until this point. It just kind of feels that way because it leaves the album on a kind of upbeat, hopeful vibe. I mean, overall this album was alright. I mean, Vic could have certainly made a worse album. Sure, there are some very thoughtful and grand and personal highs on this record, but there are also some very cringy lows too. There's some pretty good production on here. There's a lot of passable rapping, a barely existent concept. You know, it's just kind of an average album that was clearly shooting for much more than it actually accomplished. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Just leave an angry comment in the comments if you're angry. Over here next to my head is a link to watch a review for Vic Mensa's last EP. Not his last EP. His There's a Lot Going On EP, because I covered that EP. I didn't cover the EP after that, but I digress. Or you can click on the link to subscribe to the channel. I will catch you guys in the next video for